Hello everyone. So in this video, we'll discuss how does the relationship between bond prices and interest rates explain the recent collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank. So a brief background. So in early 2020, after the COVID pandemic broke out, the US Federal Reserve, so what is the US Federal Reserve? So it's basically refers to the central banking system of the United States. It's the central banking system of the US. Now you have to understand that in the US, the Fed is actually it's a federal banking system. It's not just one component like we have in RBI. It's a it's a federal banking system which comprises of the board of governors. So in the US Fed, you have the board of governors of the central bank. Then you have a federal open market committee, just like you have a RBI monetary policy committee. So in the US, you have a federal open market committee that basically decides on the interest rate, sets the interest rates. Then there are 12 regional central banks, regional Fed or regional central banks. So it's basically a system. So you should read more about the US Federal Reserve banking system. So in early 2020, after the pandemic broke out, the US Federal Reserve increased money printing to drive down interest rates and encourage consumption. So this is the policy prescription that is often followed after after a major crisis. So what is the prescription here? So the prescription is to increase money supply. So if money supply increases, then it drives down interest rates. Why? Because now there is a larger amount of money available in the market. So the supply has increased. So the price of that loanable funds will fall, which is the interest rate. So the interest rate will fall. Now, if interest rate falls, that means people can borrow more. So if they can borrow more, they can both consume more as well as invest more. So the apprehension after every crisis is that there wouldn't be enough demand in the economy to bring the economy back to a pre-crisis level. So the central banks or the governments, in that case, they decide to give more money in the hands of the people. So in the case of the central bank, the instrument that it has to give more money in the hands of the people is by reducing the rate of interest to encourage consumption as well as investment. Now, some of this printed money ended up with venture capitalists in the US, who then invested this money in startups. Now, what are venture capitalists? So, venture capitalists are basically individuals or firms that invest in early stage or high growth companies with significant growth potential. So, if I am a venture capitalist and if I see that this startup, this company has a great concept which could yield me great dividends in the future, so I'll invest in that company. So, I'll then become a venture capitalist. So, a venture capitalist provides financial capital, expertise, mentorship, and also take some amount of ownership control in the company. They are basically professional investors who manage funds raised from institutional investors such as pension funds, endowments, and wealthy individuals. So you should read about the top venture capitalists of the world and the companies that they have invested in. For example, Sequoia Capital is one of the leading venture capitalists. Then you have Tiger Global. So read about them. Okay, now coming to the Silicon Valley Bank. So Silicon Valley Bank was founded in 1983 and it was the 16th largest US bank before its collapse. So it collapsed in March 2023, so 3 months back. So when it collapsed, it was the 16th largest US bank. Now it was a banker to both venture capitalists and startups. So a lot of venture capitalists and startups used to park their funds in the Silicon Valley Bank. Okay, now so, so Fed printed more money, gave more money into the hands of the people, and some of this money ended up with the venture capitalists who invested this money in startups. Now, this was a phase which some people characterize as a phase of easy money. So there was a lot of money going around. Okay, so there was a lot of money which was available at very extremely low rates of interest. Okay, now so the Fed also indirectly handed over a lot of printed money to the US government, which in turn put it in hands of people, increasing their purchasing power. So this, along with supply chain problems, so the objective was to increase demand, to give more money in the hands of the people so as to increase demand. Now, the issue was that the COVID-19 pandemic also led to a disruption in supply chains because of the lockdowns. The factories closed down. Okay, so there were supply chain issues, and hence there was limited supply, but people had a lot of money to spend because the government had printed, or the central bank had printed a lot of money, which eventually went to the government, and the government handed it over to the people. So that there was too much money chasing too few goods. So it's a case of too much money chasing too few goods, which often results in inflation, which is often inflationary. So this is something that you should remember, that if there is too much money chasing too few goods, so it leads to inflation. Now, inflation is something that is bad for the economy. It is bad for the economy, and a central bank's primary objective is maintaining inflation. So, in for most central banks, growth is the secondary objective. It's not the primary objective. The primary objective is to maintain a stable rate of inflation. So, because inflation is something that hurts the poor, and it's a stable level of inflation is also essential for macroeconomic stability. So, amidst rising inflation, so what did the central bank do, or the Federal Reserve do? It started rising interest rates. It started increasing interest rates because it then now, because when there was inflation in the US economy, so the central bank wanted to control that. How can it control that? By encouraging people to spend less and invest less. So there would now be a lesser demand for goods, and hence there would be a fall in price level. So the Federal Reserve started increasing interest rates in order to control inflation. Now, how did it lead to collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank? So for the 3 months ended December 2019, so we are talking about the pre-COVID year. So 3 months ended December 2019. If you read this phrase, this basically means the quarter of what? October to December. Okay, Q3 in Indian sense, or Q4 in a calendar sense, the fourth quarter of 2019. We are talking about this quarter. The Silicon Valley Bank had average deposits of $55 billion, lending of $29.9 billion, and fixed income investments of $27.8 billion. Now, what are these fixed income investments? So, every bank, even in India, is mandated to invest a certain proportion in government securities. Okay, so a minimum amount is mandated, but obviously a bank can invest more also in government securities. So for Silicon Valley Bank, a fourth of its investment means 25% of its investment were in US Treasury securities. Okay. Now, as the Fed printed more money, so the average deposits of Silicon Valley Bank for the 3 months went up to $147.9 billion. So we are talking about now Q4 of 2021. So 2021 is the second year of the pandemic. So till then, the Fed was printing more money only. So if it was printing more money, so people had more money to deposit also. So thus the deposits of Silicon Valley Bank, which were $55 billion in December 2019, went up to $147.9 billion. Its lending increased from $29.9 billion to $54.5 billion. So while deposits increased from 55 to 148 billion, lending increased only at a very slow pace. So lending did not increase at a very fast pace. Meanwhile, its investment in fixed income securities jumped to approximately $112 billion, which was just $28 billion in the pre-COVID year. Okay, so basically, uh, in 2021, the Silicon Valley Bank had a large part of its portfolio comprised government securities. Okay, so clearly, when it came to raising deposits, the bank had great relationships with VCs and startups, but it was unable to give out loans at a similar pace. So, as we discussed before, that it was the bank for VCs and startups. So, if when they had more money, when VCs and startups had more money, so they deposited it in the Silicon Valley Bank, but the bank was not able to give out loans at a similar pace. So there was a mismatch between the increase in the rate of deposits and the increase in the rate of lending. So for the 3 months ended December 2022, so now we are talking about last year, its average deposits were 173 billion, loans 74 billion dollars, and investments were 117 billion dollars. Again, largely in treasury and mortgage-backed securities, basically U.S. government securities. Now, in March 2022, the Fed started interest rates to control inflation, and as we discussed in a previous video, the bond prices and interest rates are inversely related. So the Fed started interest rates to control inflation. So the for the Silicon Valley Bank, the bonds it were holding. So it was a creditor. Okay, it had because it had lent money to the government. Silicon Valley Bank had purchased bonds from the government. It had lent money to the government, but they were paying the same rate of interest, which was less than the rate of interest which the newly issued bonds would now be giving because the benchmark rate of interest has increased. Okay, so the when Fed starts to when any central bank starts to increase interest rates, then interest rates on other assets are also linked to that rate of interest only. So the newly issued bonds or asset would be giving a higher rate of interest, whereas the bonds that Silicon Valley Bank was holding were now giving a lower rate of interest because were now giving a lower rate of interest as compared to other assets, and hence the SVB's bond portfolio would be less attractive, would have become less attractive. So its bond prices fell. So its bond prices fell. Bond prices of what? The bonds that Silicon Valley Bank was holding. Please understand here when we are saying interest rates went up, here we are talking about the market rate of interest. Okay, so if the market rate of interest goes up, the interest rate that the previously issued bonds was offering will become less attractive, leading to a drop in their demand and hence a drop in bond prices. Okay, so indeed, so the issue with Silicon Valley Bank was because it was holding a large portfolio of its investment in government securities, and now the prices of those securities fell. So that's a bad thing for Silicon Valley Bank. So the bank actually sold its entire liquid bond portfolio and took a loss of $1.8 billion. Why did it take a loss? Because the demand for those bonds that it was holding was less, right? So on 8th March, the bank announced that it was raising $1.75 billion through fresh share sales to fill this gap. Okay, so this news was negatively received. So a bank selling its bond portfolio at a loss of $1.8 billion. So this was negatively received, and hence its stock price crashed. Further, as the news of this crash went viral on social media, depositors started withdrawing money, leading to an old-style bank run. So, what is a bank run? When all the depositors, yeah, majority of the depositors of a bank come on a single day or within a week at the same time to withdraw their money from the bank. Now, we all know that a bank does not keep all the money with itself. It basically invests that money in various assets. So it cannot honor the commitment of its borrowers almost at the same time. If everyone comes and asks for money, it cannot honor that. So in this case, why did everyone come and ask for their money? Because they thought that the bank was going to close down because it is selling its bond portfolio at a loss. So Silicon Valley Bank was another key feature here is that the bank was a banker to startups and venture capitalists. So given this, the size of the average deposit was very large, and 93% of its deposit were greater than $250,000 and hence uninsured. So some the Federal Reserve System or the U.S. laws insure deposits till $250,000, and but in this case, most of the deposits were extremely large in size in terms of their value, and hence these were uninsured. So so in case the bank fails to honor these commitments, the U.S. authorities or the US central bank won't be of much help here. So even the best bank cannot withstand a sustained bank run. So depositors want their money back immediately, but that money is tied up in loans and investment. So given this, while the bank wasn't really insolvent, so in this case, it wasn't the case that it couldn't repay the the loans over a longer period of time, because had it held up its bond portfolio, it could have made some profit or losses or a less amount of loss or a profit upon redemption. Okay, but it was not in a position to be able to convert its assets into cash immediately to pay these depositors. Okay, it wasn't the case that it had gone bankrupt or insolvent. In this case, it wasn't able to convert its assets into cash immediately. So people had come rushing to the Silicon Valley Bank to demand their deposits, because there was a news in the social media that the bank is incurring losses on account of on account of rising interest rates, and hence a consequent decline in the bond prices. So this dynamic basically forced government authorities to close the bank on 10th March, and the bank was later acquired by US-based First Citizens